They say the darkest hour is just before the dawn. But for me, the darkness peaked not just an hour before the sun, but when the clock struck 3:07 a.m. That was the moment I realized the man who lived across the street, a quiet old soul named Mr. Henderson, wasn't just gone. He had been replaced. My name is Sarah, and I'd been living in the quiet, almost aggressively boring suburbs of Albany, New York, for 10 years. My life was predictable. Work, gym, walk the dog. The neighborhood was the kind where people left their doors unlocked, and the biggest crime was a lawn gnome being moved. My house sat directly across from Mr. Henderson's. He was a retired history teacher, kept his hedges neatly trimmed, and always had a gentle, distant look in his eyes, like he was perpetually thinking about the Battle of Gettysburg. He lived alone, a widower for years, and our interaction was limited to a polite wave and a shared complaint about the rising property taxes. This baseline of normalcy was the foundation of my security. The only thing that ever broke the silence was the distant, predictable moan of the midnight freight train as it rattled through the valley. It was the sound of a regular world. The change started subtly. I noticed one Tuesday evening that the ancient, peeling white mailbox in front of his house, a fixture since I moved in, was gone, replaced overnight by a pristine, black, modern box. It was a minor detail, but it stood out like a black eye on an otherwise familiar face. Then, I saw him, or who I thought was him, out in his yard after midnight, pruning rose bushes that had never existed before. Mr. Henderson was meticulous, but he was also a creature of routine. He was always in bed by 10. The late-night gardening, the new mailbox, it was a wrong note in a perfect, monotonous symphony. The escalation began a week later. The temperature had dropped, the windows were sealed, and the neighborhood was locked down in a pre-winter stillness. I was woken up just after 2:30 a.m. by a sound that wasn't the train. It was the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps walking on the slate tiles of my front porch. I froze in bed, listening. The porch light was off. I told myself it was a raccoon, or maybe the neighborhood's stray cat, but the rhythm was all wrong. It was too slow, too heavy, too human. The steps paused right outside my bedroom window, and I heard a slow, wet, dragging sound, like a sack of damp clothes being pulled across stone. I didn't dare move. I waited until I heard the steps retreat, then I ran to the window, pulling the edge of the curtain back an inch. The streetlights cast long, cold shadows. The street was empty, but then I saw him. Across the street, standing perfectly still in the middle of his lawn, was the man who looked like Mr. Henderson. He was wearing the same faded blue bathrobe, but his posture was rigid, straight as a plank of wood. He didn't look at me. He was staring at my house, specifically at my bedroom window, and he stood there for a full minute, utterly motionless, until the porch light suddenly violently flickered on, blinding me, and when my eyes adjusted, he was gone. The next night, it was worse. The disturbance began at 3 a.m. on the dot. I was awake, tense, staring at the digital clock face. This time, the sound came from inside my house, a tiny, almost imperceptible scratch, like a fingernail gently scraping wallpaper, coming from the wall behind my bed. It moved. It traveled slowly down the wall, around the corner, and then I heard it distinctly at my locked bedroom door. It was no longer a scratch. It was a soft, steady thump thump thump, like something tapping the door with the flat of a palm, exactly where the lock was. I covered my mouth to muffle my breathing. I lay there for 20 minutes, hearing it, until the knocking stopped, replaced by a sound that made my blood turn to ice. A single, drawn-out, heavy sigh that seemed to originate not from the other side of the door, but from the air vent right above my head. It wasn't Mr. Henderson's gentle exhale. It was a sound of profound, weary, alien frustration. The climax arrived on the third night. 3:07 a.m. The air in my bedroom was oppressively cold. though the thermostat read 70 degrees. I was sitting up, leaning against the headboard, a flashlight in one hand and my phone in the other, ready to call 911. My back was to the window. I told myself I wouldn't look out. I kept my gaze fixed on the door. Then, a low guttural noise started. It wasn't a growl, but a kind of deep, resonant vibrating, like a massive cello string being plucked, and it was coming from outside. It grew louder, shaking the glass in my window. Against my own will, I slowly turned my head. There was the man, the replacement, standing on my lawn, closer than ever before, right at the property line. He was facing my window, and the vibrating noise was coming from his chest. The streetlight glare hit his face, and I saw it. It wasn't Mr. Henderson. The features were close, undeniably, but they were stretched too tight. The skin too smooth, the mouth a perfect thin, lipless line that looked like a scar. His eyes, they were large, black, and perfectly blank, like two pools of oil reflecting the darkness. He lifted his hand, slowly, and pointed a long, bony finger directly at me. And he didn't point at my face or my chest. He pointed at the spot on the wall behind me where the scratching had started the night before. I screamed, but it was a pathetic, choked thing, and I dove under the covers, clutching the flashlight. I didn't move for an hour. When I finally emerged, the sun was beginning to break the horizon, painting the sky with a thin, sickly orange. I looked out the window. The lawn was pristine. The street was empty. I called the police that morning, reporting a missing person, Mr. Henderson. They came, they checked his house. Everything was neat. The lights were off. The garage was empty. The car was gone. They filed the report as a voluntary disappearance. But when I went outside later that day to check my own porch, I saw it. Carved into the slate tile, right where the footsteps had paused, was a new, faint scratch. Not a raccoon claw, it was the letter H. And across the street, in front of the house that now felt utterly alien, the brand new modern black mailbox had a single, tiny, perfectly drilled hole right through the center. I know I should move, leave the house and this cursed quiet street, but every night, I find myself sitting by the window, watching that dark, silent house, because I have a terrible, paralyzing fear. I'm not afraid of the thing that replaced him. I'm afraid that one morning, I'm going to look in the bathroom mirror and see that perfect, thin, lipless line starting to form right where my mouth should be. I've always loved the desert, especially at night. There's a purity to the darkness out here in the Nevada high plains. No light pollution, just you and the overwhelming canopy of stars. It's what drove me to buy the small, isolated ranch property 50 miles outside of Tonopah. But out here, where the nearest neighbor is a half-hour drive away, I learned something terrifying in the dead of night. The desert doesn't just hold silence, it holds things that thrive in that silence, and they are masters of imitation. My name is Kevin, and I'm a former architect who traded skyscrapers for solitude. The ranch house was ramshackle, but the land was beautiful. Just vast stretches of scrub brush, rock, and the occasional stubborn juniper tree. My first 6 months were the definition of peace. I had a generator, a well, and the only traffic I ever heard was the buzz of the power lines running over the mesa 3 miles away. The baseline of normalcy was the routine. I'd work on renovating the house until sunset, eat dinner, and be asleep by 10:30, waking with the sun. The first instance of wrongness was so subtle it felt like a hallucination. I was standing on my porch one midnight, enjoying the frigid air, when I heard a distinct, short, high-pitched whistle. It sounded like someone calling a dog. I don't have a dog, and no one lives close enough to be calling theirs. I dismissed it as wind tricking my ears, a trick of the acoustics in the vast empty space. But the seed was planted. The desert was quiet, yes, but not empty. The strange occurrences began to escalate the following week. Always between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. the first night, I was jarred awake by the sound of my pickup truck's alarm blaring, a panicked, urgent sound that cut through the silence. I grabbed the old hunting rifle and ran out onto the porch in my boxers. The truck was sitting exactly where I'd parked it. The lights weren't flashing. The alarm wasn't sounding. It was silent. I stood there, shivering, for 10 minutes, listening to the absolute, unbroken quiet, feeling like the sound I heard had been pushed directly into my head. The next night, it was something different. I was sleeping soundly when I woke up with the immediate, visceral sensation that someone was inside the house. Not the feeling of a break-in, but the certainty of a presence. My heart hammering, I got up and walked through the dark, empty rooms. Everything was locked. Nothing was out of place. But as I passed the hall mirror, I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection. A flicker of movement, low to the ground, just behind my ankles. When I spun around, there was nothing but the dark wood floor. This happened for 3 nights. The phantom truck alarm, the fleeting reflection, the internal certainty of another presence. The events were disconnected, but the effect was cumulative, a growing psychological dread. I started leaving every light in the house on, burning through my generator fuel. Then, the mimicry started. It was 2:15 a.m., and I was reading a paperback, trying to focus, when I heard a sound from outside that was horribly familiar, the distant, predictable moan of a midnight freight train rattling through the valley. This was the same train sound I used to hear in Albany, New York, where I grew up. The problem? There are no active train tracks within 100 miles of my ranch. I listened, paralyzed, as the sound continued. The rhythmic clickety-clack of the wheels on the rails, the lonely horn blast. It was perfect. It was a flawless sound portrait of something that didn't exist here. It felt like an audio hallucination, designed specifically for my ears, a piece of my past weaponized against my present isolation. The train sound faded away, leaving only the buzzing silence, and when I finally went to the window, the moon was high. I saw movement. A shape was standing right at the edge of the scrub brush, maybe 50 yards from the house. It was thin, too tall, and it was watching the house. I couldn't make out details, but it didn't look like a coyote or a deer. It was angled toward me, and then, from that shape, I heard it. My name, Kevin. It wasn't a shout. It was a soft, tentative whisper, delivered in the exact, unmistakable voice of my dead mother. The climax hit the following night. I was huddled in the kitchen, the rifle across my lap, too terrified to sleep. The dead of night arrived, and I didn't have to wait long. This time, the sounds came directly from the attic above my head. It started with the sound of a woman crying, low and mournful, but it wasn't my mother's voice. It sounded like an old, scratched-up record of a woman crying. Then, it shifted, becoming a series of short, frantic thumps, like a large bird trapped and slamming itself repeatedly against the rafters. Finally, the true terror, the trapped, frantic sounds morphed into something precise and deliberate, a loud, clear, repeated knocking, but it wasn't on the walls or the floor. It was the frantic, specific sound of knuckles rapping against the inside of the ceiling vent cover in the kitchen. Knock, 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 knock. It was a signal. I pointed the flashlight at the vent and saw the thin aluminum cover vibrating, ever so slightly. Then, the knocking stopped, and I heard a noise that was clearly, unmistakably, a human man clearing his throat, directly above the thin metal screen. A single, wet, preparatory ahem. Then, a new sound came through the vent, a deep, calm, male voice speaking my exact GPS coordinates out loud, followed by a quiet, unsettling chuckle. It knew exactly where I was, and it was announcing it, to me, and to the endless, black desert. I left the next morning. I didn't pack anything. I just put the rifle down, got in the truck, and drove until the blacktop turned into the interstate, not looking in the rearview mirror once. The house is still out there, locked up, a monument to fear. I haven't sold it. I can't bring myself to go back, and I can't bear the thought of someone else moving in. I'm back in the city now, living on the 10th floor of an apartment building in downtown Los Angeles. I keep the windows locked and the blinds drawn. I'm safe here. There are sirens, horns, and people everywhere. But sometimes, when the city noise drops out for a brief, perfect second, I hear a new sound in the pre-dawn quiet. A sound I never heard in the desert, but one that has clearly followed me. The faint, unmistakable ping of an elevator arriving, followed by the soft, rhythmic click of heavy footsteps walking down the carpeted hall outside my locked front door. And I realized the silence out there in the desert wasn't empty. It was listening, learning, and recording. And now, its recordings are playing back, specifically for me, no matter how many miles I put between us. There's a reason people avoid the old logging roads deep in the Olympic National Forest, especially at night. It's not just the treacherous turns or the threat of a flat tire miles from anywhere. It's because some things prefer to stay hidden in the darkest shadows, and if you stumble upon their territory when the moon is high, you might just find that the forest has eyes, and they are not human. My name is Marc, and I've been a freelance photographer for 15 years, specializing in forgotten Americana and unsettling landscapes. I grew up in a small town on the edge of the forest in Washington state, so the woods were my backyard. This familiarity bred a certain bravado. On a late autumn night, around 11 p.m., I decided to venture deeper than usual, chasing a rumored abandoned ranger station that promised incredible, eerie shots under a full moon. My old Jeep was reliable, my camera gear packed, and I had a thermos of coffee. The baseline of normalcy was the comforting drone of the Jeep's engine, the crunch of gravel under the tires, and the familiar scent of pine and damp earth. The first inkling of wrongness was when my GPS signal abruptly died, replaced by a garbled, static screech. I wasn't surprised. These old roads often had dead zones. I knew the general direction, so I kept driving, pushing further into the black, winding tunnels of ancient trees. The road became narrower, the canopy thicker, and the darkness absolute, save for my high beams cutting a yellow swath through the inky blackness. The escalation began when I realized I was well and truly lost. I'd been driving for what felt like hours, the Jeep's fuel gauge steadily dropping. Every turn looked the same. The trees were monolithic, pressing in on either side. At around 1:30 a.m., I decided to pull over, shut off the engine, and consult my physical map by flashlight. The silence that descended was heavy, almost suffocating, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. As I unfolded the map, a flash of movement caught my eye. Deep in the tree line, beyond the reach of my headlights, I saw a pair of yellow-orange eyes. They were large, round, and perfectly still, reflecting the faint, ambient moonlight. Too high off the ground for a deer, too wide for a coyote. I stared, holding my breath, and after a long moment, they slowly, deliberately, blinked. Then they were gone. I told myself it was some nocturnal animal, a cougar perhaps, but the way they had blinked, so human-like, sent a shiver down my spine. I started the Jeep and drove on, faster now, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. A half hour later, I stopped again, convinced I saw something move in my rearview mirror. Nothing. But when I looked at the side of the road, directly beside my driver's window, a small, hand-carved wooden doll was lying on the moss. It was crudely made, with rough-hewn features and 2 black buttons for eyes. It hadn't been there a second before. I panicked, swerving the Jeep as I sped away, leaving the doll behind. A few miles further, the road opened into a small, desolate clearing. In the center, under the full moon, stood what looked like a dozen or more of those same crude wooden dolls, arranged in a perfect, silent circle. They were all facing inwards, their button eyes glinting. One of them, taller than the rest, had its back to me. As I slowed, feeling an icy dread crawl up my spine, the tallest doll slowly rotated on its axis, its head turning, until its button eyes were staring directly into my headlights. The climax arrived with a sickening jolt. I floored the accelerator, tearing out of the clearing, the images of those dolls seared into my mind. I took a sharp turn, praying it was the right direction, and then my headlights caught something else on the road ahead, something impossibly tall, unnaturally thin, and almost indistinct against the dense forest backdrop. It was standing in the middle of the logging road, blocking my path. It had the same proportions as a human, but it was far too tall, easily 9 or 10 feet, and incredibly slender. Its skin or covering seemed to absorb the light, making it a dark, wavering silhouette. As I got closer, I could make out details that made my blood run cold. Long, jointed limbs, and a head that was too small for its body, almost vestigial. But what truly paralyzed me was its face, or lack thereof. It was utterly smooth, featureless, like a piece of polished driftwood. Yet, somehow, I knew it was looking at me. And then it moved. It didn't step or walk. It flowed, a ripple of movement, across its unnaturally long body, and it started to shrink, telescoping down, becoming shorter and shorter, until it was the size of a child. And as it shrunk, two large, round, perfectly yellow-orange eyes slowly opened on its smooth, featureless face, reflecting my headlights with an ancient, predatory intelligence. The eyes were precisely the same color and shape as the pair I had seen blinking at me from the tree line hours earlier. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt just feet from where the now child-sized, featureless entity with those burning eyes stood. It raised a long, thin arm, slowly, and pointed a finger with an impossibly long nail directly at my windshield. I backed up the Jeep, spun around, and drove in the opposite direction, not caring where I was going, just needing to get away. I drove until the sun began to rise, painting the sky with pale light, and only then did I find a paved road leading out of the forest, back to civilization. I never took another photo trip into the deep woods again. I sold my Jeep and bought a smaller car, one that sticks to the main roads. But every so often, when I'm driving at night, and the streetlights are sparse, I see it, just for a flicker. A pair of yellow-orange eyes, reflecting the distant brake lights of the car ahead, staring at me from the shadows of a roadside bush. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I'll hear a faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound, not on the walls, but on the outside of my window, high up on the 3rd floor. I know what's out there in the dark woods of the Olympic National Forest, and I know it remembers the night I drove through its territory. And sometimes, when I wake up in the dead of night, I wonder if the small, crude wooden doll I find on my porch in the morning, with its black button eyes, is meant as a warning or an invitation.